Lena stood in front of the mirror, carefully adjusting her makeup. The soft hum of the city filtered through the closed window, but her mind was elsewhere. Something had changed in Alex. The man she'd been with for 2 years, the one who had once been so attentive and loving, was now distant, aloof. The signs were subtle at first, small, almost imperceptible shifts in his behavior, but now they were impossible to ignore. She couldn't put her finger on exactly what had happened, but it was as if a veil had descended between them, one that neither of them could pull back. Her heart tightened every time she looked at him. They had built a life together in their small but cozy apartment in the heart of the city, and for months, everything had felt perfect. But now she wasn't sure who he was anymore. It started about a month ago, just after he had returned from a business trip. At first, Lena thought she was imagining things. She noticed him being more secretive with his phone, always making sure to lock it when he left it lying around. His late-night work emails had increased, though they were often vague and non-specific. Lena had asked him about it, only for him to brush her off with a distracted, "It's nothing, just work stuff." But then the tone of his voice changed too. There was an edge to it that hadn't been there before, a shortness in his responses that left her wondering if she had done something wrong. He used to ask about her day, listen to her stories with genuine interest. Now, it seemed like he couldn't wait to leave the room. Even the way he looked at her had changed. Where there had once been warmth and affection, there was now something colder, more guarded. That night, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, Lena caught him again. Alex had walked into the living room, his back to her, his voice a murmur as he quickly ended a phone call. He didn't notice her watching him, but she had seen the brief, fleeting look of panic in his eyes as he shoved his phone into his pocket. Her stomach churned, the old, familiar feeling of suspicion rising in her chest. The next morning, she decided to confront him. "Alex," she said, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest, "I need to talk to you." He looked up from his coffee, his brow furrowed. "What's up? Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "You've been distant lately, and I don't know why." He paused, his eyes darting away for just a moment before he looked back at her. The silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. "I'm just tired, Lena," he said finally, his voice too calm, too controlled. "You know how it is, work's been crazy lately." But something in the way he said it didn't sit right with her. The words were too rehearsed, too easy. She knew him better than that. The Alex she knew didn't hide things, didn't lie. Yet here he was, acting like a stranger in his own home. Lena didn't push the conversation further. She knew better than to demand answers when he was like this. But the doubts didn't dissipate. They only grew. As the days passed, Lena found herself growing more and more paranoid. She started noticing things she hadn't before, small, insignificant things that, when pieced together, created a much bigger picture. The way he'd started leaving the apartment more often, sometimes without saying where he was going. The random texts he received, always followed by a quick glance at her, as if checking to see if she had noticed. The late nights, the silence that stretched between them when they were together. One evening, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Alex had left the apartment for another one of his meetings. Lena didn't trust him anymore, and the need for answers burned within her. She was tired of feeling like a fool, tired of waiting for him to explain himself. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Lena sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the phone she had grabbed from the drawer. She had never done this before, never snooped, never gone through his things, but the overwhelming sense of unease was too much. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She unlocked his phone, the familiar passcode still fresh in her mind. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steeled herself. She had to know the truth. The first thing she saw was an email, one that Alex had left open on his screen. The subject line caught her eye, meeting confirmation 5 p.m, room 301. It was from a name she didn't recognize, Avery something. The email was brief, confirming the time and location for the meeting. But Lena knew this wasn't work. There was a tone to it, something too personal. Her heart began to race, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She scrolled through the messages, her eyes darting over text exchanges that made her stomach churn. There were mentions of seeing each other again soon. I miss you, and can't wait to be with you. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. It didn't take much to connect the dots. Alex was having an affair. Her hands shook as she put the phone down, her mind reeling. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but the evidence was right there in front of her, undeniable. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, was betraying her in the worst way possible. Lena's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, anger, confusion. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. She had to confront him, had to hear him admit it. But a part of her wasn't sure she even wanted to know the truth anymore. What would she do if it was true? How could she ever look at him the same way again? The door clicked open, and Alex walked into the room. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but Lena could see the tiniest flicker of panic in his eyes. "Lena," he began, his voice faltering just a little, but it was enough. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. He took a step forward, but Lena held up a hand to stop him. "I know," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I know what you've been doing." Alex froze. The colour drained from his face, and for the first time in weeks, Lena saw him look genuinely afraid. "Lena, save it," she cut him off. "I don't need your excuses. I've seen the messages. I know about Avery. I know about everything." The silence that followed was deafening. The truth was out, hanging in the air between them like a thick fog. Lena could barely look at him, her heart aching with the weight of it all. Alex opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of forgiveness, but Lena knew deep down that it was over. She had loved him, had trusted him, but now everything had changed. The life they had built, the love they had shared, was nothing but a lie. Lena stood up, her legs weak beneath her. She needed to get out of there, away from him, away from the pain. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't stay with him any longer. As she walked towards the door, Alex called out her name, his voice breaking, but Lena didn't turn back. There was nothing left to say. The truth was all that mattered now, and it was more than she could bear. And so, Lena stepped out into the night, the darkness swallowing her whole, as the door to her past slammed shut behind her. The weeks that followed Lena's confrontation with Alex were a blur. She moved out of their shared apartment, retreating to a small, dimly lit studio on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The silence of the space felt both suffocating and freeing, a contradiction that tugged at her heart every time she stepped through the door. There was no more laughter, no more warmth. Only the echo of memories that now seemed like they belonged to someone else. But the real struggle began when Alex started calling. At first, it was just once or twice a day, his voice full of pleading and regret. "Lena, please. We need to talk. I can explain. Please just give me a chance to explain," he'd beg, his tone desperate, almost broken. Lena refused to pick up. She wasn't ready to face him, not yet. She had no idea what she would say to him, what could possibly be left to say. What good was an explanation when the betrayal was so clear, so undeniable? But then the calls became more frequent, and the texts grew more insistent. "Lena, you know this isn't what it seems. Let me show you. Let's talk. We can fix this." And yet, every time Lena looked at her phone, the familiar knots of betrayal twisted in her stomach. She wanted to block him, erase him from her life completely, but part of her, some fragile, broken part, still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could explain. Maybe there was a reason for what he had done. Maybe there was something she hadn't understood. The worst of it came late one night, 3 weeks after the confrontation, when Lena couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying every moment of her relationship with Alex, the good, the bad, the confusing. She tossed and turned in the small bed, her sheets tangled around her, but the restlessness wouldn't stop. She grabbed her phone, half expecting to see another missed call from him, but this time it was different. There was a message from an unknown number, something that immediately caught her attention. It read, "I know you've been looking for the truth, Lena. If you want to know what really happened, meet me at the cafe on 5th and Main tomorrow at 7 p.m. Don't tell anyone." Her heart pounded. The message was cryptic, yet somehow it felt like a lifeline. It felt like someone, finally, was offering her answers that Alex couldn't or wouldn't give. But who was this person? How did they know so much? At first, Lena hesitated. It could be a trap. It could be another twisted game, some cruel person trying to manipulate her when she was already at her lowest. But then she thought of the phone calls, the messages, the unanswered questions that gnawed at her every day. Could she really afford not to go? The thought of facing Alex again, hearing his lies and excuses, made her stomach turn, but this was different. This felt like an opportunity for something more, something real. She made up her mind. The next day, Lena found herself sitting in a small corner booth at the cafe, staring at the clock above the counter. It was 7:15. She had arrived early, her nerves making her too restless to sit still. The place was quiet, save for the soft chatter of a couple at the counter and the gentle hum of the barista preparing drinks. The familiar smell of freshly ground coffee filled the air, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. She checked her phone again. No new messages. No missed calls. But just as she was about to leave, a man walked in tall, wearing a dark coat and a hat that obscured most of his face. He looked around for a moment, his eyes scanning the room before they settled on her. Lena felt her pulse quicken, but she remained seated, trying to keep her composure. The man nodded at her, and Lena couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. He approached the booth slowly, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "You came," he said, his voice low and gravelly, though it was tinged with a note of approval. "I didn't expect you to. Most people would have walked away by now." Lena didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts were racing. She studied the man closely. He didn't look familiar, but there was something about him that made her uncomfortable. He wasn't here just to chat. "I know you're confused," the man continued, his eyes never leaving her. "I know you've been looking for answers. Alex won't give them to you. He doesn't want you to know the truth. But I can show you, Lena. I can give you the answers you've been seeking. Who are you?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man leaned forward slightly, his face now partly illuminated by the overhead light. His eyes were dark, calculating. "I'm someone who's been watching. Someone who's been keeping track of what's been happening. And I know things about Alex that you wouldn't believe." Lena's stomach churned. "What do you want from me?" He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing. But you want something, don't you? You want to know why he's been acting this way. You want to know the truth about his late-night calls, the hidden messages, the things he's been doing behind your back. I can give you that. I can show you everything. Why should I trust you?" Lena asked, narrowing her eyes. "How do I know you're not just another one of his lies?" The man didn't flinch. "I'm not here to lie to you. I'm here to help you. But you have to trust me." Lena stared at him, weighing her options. Every instinct in her screamed to walk away, but the part of her that needed answers, the part that had been starving for closure, couldn't let go. "Fine," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Tell me what you know." He nodded, pulling out his phone. "It's all in the messages. I've been tracking Alex's phone for weeks. I've seen the calls, the texts, everything. And there's something you need to understand about him, something that goes deeper than what you think." Lena's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? The man's fingers flew across the screen of his phone as he typed something quickly. Alex isn't just cheating on you. He's involved in something much bigger. Something dangerous. Lena's mind whirled as the words hit her. Dangerous? What was he talking about? She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a simple affair. It was something more. Something that could unravel everything she thought she knew about Alex and everything she thought she knew about herself. Before she could ask more questions, the man slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a series of messages between Alex and an unknown contact. They were brief, almost coded, but the context was clear. They were talking about money, hidden deals, and a job that needed to be completed, something about Alex needing to be in the clear before it all went public. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she read the messages. Her fingers trembled, but she couldn't look away. The man leaned back in his seat, watching her intently, waiting for her to process it. I know this is a lot to take in, he said quietly. But you need to be careful. Alex isn't who you think he is. And if you keep digging, you might find yourself in a very dangerous situation. Lena's world tilted. She felt the weight of his words, the terrifying reality of what she was now facing. Alex wasn't just a man who had cheated on her. He was a man who had hidden a dark secret, a secret that could destroy everything. The man in front of her wasn't lying. The evidence was right there in front of her, and it was worse than she could have ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. Lena couldn't shake the images of the messages. The cold words between Alex and his mysterious contact burned in her mind, their meaning far too clear for comfort. Dangerous, the man had said. Alex isn't who you think he is. Those words echoed through her thoughts, bouncing off the walls of her small apartment as if they had come to life. The more she tried to ignore them, the more they gnawed at her. She needed to know the truth. She couldn't let this whatever it was linger in the dark any longer. The lies, the betrayal, the secrecy. Alex wasn't just unfaithful. He was hiding something much darker, and she was determined to uncover it. It was the Saturday morning after her meeting with the mysterious man at the cafe when Lena found herself sitting in front of her computer, staring at the blurred-out text messages Alex had sent. The sense of dread in her chest had only grown with each passing day. She opened the file again, hoping for some clarity, something that would give her a better understanding of what Alex was involved in. There was a part of her that wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding, that Alex had somehow gotten mixed up with the wrong people, that he hadn't knowingly been part of something sinister. But another part of her deeper, darker feared the truth more than anything. The text messages were vague but revealing. The talk of cleaning up, of needing to keep things quiet, of a shipment that Alex was supposed to oversee, it was all so cryptic, so disjointed. What was he involved in? Was it criminal? Was he in over his head? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, breaking her concentration. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? Lena opened the door to find a delivery man holding a small package. His uniform was plain, and his face was unfamiliar, but something about the way he stood there, looking just a little too tense, made her pulse quicken. Package for Lena Harrison, the man said, his voice a little too flat, a little too rehearsed. She took the package, feeling a surge of anxiety. Was it from Alex? From the mysterious person who had been sending her cryptic messages? She could feel her hand shaking as she closed the door behind her. Lena tore open the package. Inside, there was a single envelope, sealed with a dark red wax that bore no recognizable symbol. Inside the envelope were two things, a short letter and a small, black USB drive. Her heart pounded as she pulled the letter from the envelope. She opened it carefully, reading the few short lines written in hastily scrawled handwriting. Asterisk, if you want to know the truth, you need to see this. Be careful who you trust. You don't know who's watching. Asterisk, that was it. No name, no further explanation. Just a warning. Lena's thoughts raced as she stared at the USB drive. It was cold, unmarked, and ominous. Should she even plug it into her computer? Could it be a trap, another layer of manipulation? But she had already come this far. She had to know. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, she inserted the USB drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, and then the video began to play. At first, all she saw was a grainy, shaky camera view of a dark room, the kind that looked like it could be a warehouse or a basement. The walls were bare, lit only by a dim, flickering bulb above. Alex was in the frame, his face tense, his eyes darting nervously. He looked nothing like the man she had once known. There was a tension in his posture, an edge to his demeanor, something that made him look out of place, like he didn't belong. Then a voice came through the static, low, gruff, and unmistakably menacing. "You better have everything ready, Alex. This deal doesn't wait for anyone," the voice said. Lena's stomach twisted. She had heard that voice before, on the phone, in the text messages. There was no mistaking it. It was the same person who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. "I'll have it ready," Alex replied, his voice strained. Just give me a little more time." The man on the other end of the video chuckled darkly. "Time's up, Alex. You know what happens next if you fail. We're not playing games anymore." The video cut to black for a brief moment, and when it resumed, Alex was standing in front of what appeared to be a large, metal crate, the kind used for shipping. The man's voice came again, more distant this time. "You know what you need to do. Get the shipment and meet me in the usual place. Don't even think about trying to run." Alex didn't respond, but the look on his face said it all. He was terrified. He knew what was at stake. And worse, he knew he was trapped. Lena's chest tightened as the reality of the situation set in. Alex wasn't just involved in some shady deal, he was in deeper than she could have imagined. He wasn't just a man caught in the middle of a mistake, he was an active participant in something dangerous and illegal. And the worst part, she had been living alongside him, oblivious to it all. Lena sat back, her hands trembling as the video ended. There was a dark, unsettling truth before her now, a truth she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't ignore. Alex had lied to her. He had been hiding something from her for far too long, and she had trusted him. But now, everything had changed. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her shock. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart sinking. Asterisk, you saw the video. Now you know. But the question is, what are you going to do with this information? You're not the only one looking for the truth, Lena. Watch your back. Asterisk, the message felt like a warning. There was no name, no way to trace it. It was just a threat, or perhaps a reminder that she was now entangled in something much bigger than herself. Lena's mind raced as she tried to process everything. What now? What could she possibly do with the information she had? Confront Alex? Would that even matter anymore? Would he tell her the truth? Or would he deny it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Alex himself. "I need to talk. Please, Lena, I know you're upset, but this is bigger than you think. I'm sorry. Please just hear me out. I'm in trouble." Lena stared at the message, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the sense of betrayal sharp and deep. This was it. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. She could no longer pretend that everything was okay, that Alex wasn't involved in something dark. But what would happen if she confronted him? Could she trust him to tell her the truth? Or was she already too far down a rabbit hole of lies? She typed her response carefully, her fingers hovering over the keys. "I know what you've been hiding, Alex. I saw the video. I know what you're involved in. Don't lie to me again." The message sent, and she immediately felt a sense of finality settle in. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and Alex had no choice but to face it. Lena didn't wait for his reply. Instead, she stood up and grabbed her jacket, the weight of what she was about to do pressing heavily on her chest. She didn't know what she was going to say when she saw him, didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The door to the small cafe creaked open, and Lena froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her palms felt clammy despite the cold, dry air. Alex was standing by the door, his eyes scanning the room, desperately searching for her among the scattered patrons. He looked the same, his dark hair slightly tousled, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more fragile. His face was tense, a mix of guilt and determination, as if he was fighting to control emotions that were threatening to escape. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This moment had been coming for days, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. What was she supposed to do? How was she supposed to act in front of the man who had been part of her life for so long, the man who she once trusted more than anyone, but who had lied to her, manipulated her, and dragged her into a world she didn't understand? The weight of the situation was crushing. Alex's betrayal had shattered her sense of reality, leaving her uncertain of what was true and what wasn't. There were so many unanswered questions, so many conflicting emotions that had built up inside her over the past few days. Anger, confusion, fear, hope. And yet, beneath it all, there was still a part of her that wanted to believe in him, to believe that somehow they could go back to the way things were. But could she? Could she forgive him after everything? Was it even possible to move past the lies, the secrets, the darkness he had been hiding? Lena, Alex's voice broke through the silence, and her gaze locked with his. She could see the panic in his eyes, the way he was fighting to keep his composure. I am so sorry. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please, just let me explain. I need you to understand. His words felt empty, hollow. She'd heard them before, countless times. Just hear me out, Lena, he had begged her through text. Please, I'm in trouble. But what did he want her to hear? The truth? The version of the truth that made him look like the victim? Or was it all just another layer of manipulation to keep her in his grip? Lena felt the emotions stirring inside her: rage at the lies, hurt at the betrayal, but also a strange sense of sympathy. It was hard to ignore the man she had once known, the man who had held her in his arms and whispered sweet promises, the man who had made her believe that their future was certain. He was still standing in front of her, broken, desperate, and if she was being honest with herself, she couldn't just walk away from him without at least hearing him out. The decision hung in the air, suffocating her. Sit down, she said, her voice a little colder than she intended. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. Alex hesitated for just a moment before sliding into the chair, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a flicker of hope in his gaze, the kind of look that made her question everything. Could he still be the man she had once known? Could he somehow redeem himself after everything? He opened his mouth to speak, but Lena cut him off, her voice barely a whisper. I don't even know where to start, Alex. You've been lying to me for months. You've been hiding things from me. I don't even recognize you anymore. I saw the video. I know what you're involved in. And the worst part, you let me live in a lie. Alex's face fell. Lena, please. God, I don't know where to begin. I never meant for you to get involved in any of this. It was supposed to be a simple job. I didn't want it to go this far. But I got in too deep. And I didn't know how to get out. Lena shook her head, her chest tightening with each word. You got in too deep. You've been doing this behind my back, lying to me about your job, about everything. You kept telling me everything was fine. And you didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth when it mattered. How could you, Alex? The bitterness in her voice was undeniable. She had been a fool, hadn't she? She had trusted him. He had made her feel safe, secure, loved. And yet, he had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even begin to fathom. I was trying to protect you, he said quietly, his voice breaking as he spoke. I didn't want to drag you into this. I didn't want you to be part of this world. It's dangerous, Lena. And I never thought it would come to this. But when you started asking questions, when you started getting too close, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to make it go away. The tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to be strong, had to stay in control. She had already cried too many tears for him. So what? You thought lying to me would protect me? Keeping secrets, hiding everything from me, how is that protecting me, Alex? How is it anything but manipulation? I was scared, Alex admitted, his voice a broken whisper. I was in too deep, and I didn't know how to fix it. I never meant for you to get hurt. I love you, Lena. I still do. Lena's heart wavered at his words. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, the way he was pleading for her forgiveness. But the truth was, she didn't know if she could trust him anymore. Could she forgive the man who had deceived her so completely? Could she ever look at him the same way again? She ran her hands through her hair, trying to push the overwhelming emotions away. I don't know if I can do this, Alex. I don't know if I can forgive you for everything. You lied to me. You kept me in the dark about everything. And I don't know who you are anymore. Alex's voice cracked as he reached across the table, grabbing her hand in his. Please, Lena. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to believe me when I say that I never wanted any of this to happen. I didn't want to get involved in this mess. I didn't want to drag you down with me. But now I need you, more than ever. I'm trying to fix this. Please, don't walk away from me. Lena stared down at their hands, the heat of his touch burning her skin. Her pulse was racing. There was a part of her deep down that still wanted to believe him, that wanted to forgive him and move forward. But could she? Could she ever really trust him again after everything that had happened? I don't know, Alex, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Alex's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like he might crumble under the weight of her words. Please, Lena. Just give me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I'll get out of this mess. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm not the person you think I am. I'll leave it all behind if I have to. Just please don't leave me. Her mind raced, torn between the man she loved and the man who had betrayed her. Could she really forgive him? Could she put all of this behind her? Or would she always be haunted by the lies, the secrets, and the shadows of his past? Lena closed her eyes, trying to quiet the storm inside her. Forgiving him wasn't just about moving past the betrayal. It was about deciding if she could ever see him as the person he once was, or if the man she thought she knew was gone for good. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Alex's hand was still holding hers, his fingers trembling as if he feared that she might pull away at any moment. And in that silence, Lena made a decision. She had to make a choice whether to walk away from everything she had known, from everything she had once believed in, or to stay, to fight for the man who still held her heart in his hands. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and uncertainty. I need time, Alex, she said softly. I need time to figure this out. I need time to see if I can ever trust you again. He nodded, his face filled with regret. I'll wait, Lena. I'll wait for as long as it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. Lena stood up, her legs shaky beneath her, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. The future was uncertain, and the truth was still out there, waiting for her to uncover it. But for now, she had to walk away and find the answers within herself before deciding if she could forgive him or if it was time to walk away for good. As she turned and left the cafe, the weight of the decision still heavy on her shoulders, Lena knew that this was only the beginning. The story wasn't over. And no matter what she chose, the truth would follow her every step of the way.